So the PhD process, as anyone who knows, anybody who's done a PhD or done it themselves, know you go into this very black hole. If you discover yourself, you become a much stronger emotional person, a stronger person emotionally, and you also know that there's nothing else in life that can be tougher than actually completing a PhD. By the time I got to my third year of PhD, I'd been at Sciences Po in Paris. That's where I completed my PhD between LSE and Sciences Po in Paris, because I was doing a comparative study of French and British foreign aid policy. I was offered a lectureship at LSE. My main claim to fame at LSE is I was the first black British lecturer ever appointed at the LSE in its history. But I was really absolutely 100% convinced I didn't want to stay in academia. In fact, if anything, that PhD experience had found me feeling more and more claustrophobic. I'd been out in the world, travelled around the world, as an undergraduate, not very far, but enough to know I did not want to be in those four walls of academia. And I had already made the decision. Ironically, the week I started my PhD, in 1985, October, the Broadwater Farm riots happened. And I happened to find myself in the midst of those riots. And in the midst of those riots, not only were they terrifying, but I had to look around and say, what on earth is going on? Try to understand what was happening there. And I came back home, I turned on the TV, and for the next days and months, I observed the reporting on the Broadwater Farm riots. And I said to myself, if I'm going to do something useful with my education, I need to be in that space. I need to be somebody who can interpret the world intelligently for a broader public, so they actually know what's going on, because I felt that the coverage was appalling and very biased, very unfair. It took me a while to get there. 1989, I was on staff at LSE. I finished my PhD. I said to my mentor, Professor Fred Halliday, I'm off. I need to become a journalist now. And I was very lucky. I got a very lucky break. I got a 3-month contract with a program that some people remember called Heart of the Matter with Joan Bakewell. And that was in October 1989. And lo and behold, in November 1989, the stars aligned, because I spoke fluent German, or fluent enough to practice in Germany, and the Berlin Wall came down. And Heart of the Matter was in the Religious Affairs department at the BBC, and everyone else in the BBC was sending people to Berlin, except for the Religious Affairs programme department, because they didn't have anyone who spoke German or knew Germany. Until this fellow popped up and said, well, yeah, I do, because of course they didn't expect me to be the person who would say, yeah, I'm German, because I didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes. But it turned out that I was just the right person for the right time in the right job, and they sent me off to Berlin 3 weeks into the BBC, with the mission of having everything set up within 4 days for a crew to come out and film behind the Berlin Wall. Well, believe it or not, it was a baptism of fire. We did get a film made from behind the Berlin Wall, filming in Leipzig and Dresden and East Berlin, and it actually was a pretty good film, made and broadcast within 2 weeks of the fall of the wall. It still has stood the test of time. That began my exposure, if you like, to the BBC, but it set me up nicely because it was a high-profile story. I managed to pull it off, and within 2 years I was in the News and Current Affairs department, working on programs like Assignment and Money Programme, things like On the Record, working in BBC Breakfast News, and slowly I built up a credibility and a career which enabled me finally to become an on-screen reporter after about 5 or 6 years. And so it took me 6 or 7 years of working through a whole range of BBC programmes, like Money Programme, like Assignment, through radio programmes like Money Box, Wake Up to Money, Inside Money, Today programme, to get to understand how the discourse is created in broadcast media. And there came a point when actually I was ready to move. As always with these things, I got a lucky break. The head of radio news had some money on one side for special projects, and I suggested doing something on people who were beginning to work at home, This was in the mid-1990s, and she said, well, here's £1,000. Go off and make me a series for Radio 5. Radio 5 have only just started, on people who work from home. So I picked the most far-flung reaches of the United Kingdom, went to the Shetland Islands, went to Cornwall, went to Leeds, went to Portsmouth, went to all sorts of places to gather stories of people who were working from home, doing different things. And it was a complete triumph, this series on Radio 5, on Sybil Roscoe's programme. And that got me noticed. And it got me noticed in business programmes, because there was a business focus of that particular series. And I was asked to become the staff editor on Moneybox, which is the BBC's longest running personal finance programme. Many of you may know it. That wasn't a great fit, if I'll be honest. It was interesting worked with some great people, very knowledgeable. It helped me learn about the detail of stories, and that really mattered. You know, it was like the full stop on the Moneybox really mattered, whether or not you liked it. But it wasn't really a good fit. And luckily enough, the BBC had decided in '95 so I've been in the BBC 6 years then, to launch a programme called Black Britain. They wanted to expand the type of story pool that were available to the BBC audience. They recognised that actually Britain had changed. Of course, you're in a time when you've got post-Stephen Lawrence, his death in murder in 1993, you've had riots, you've had all the kind of things which had raised the temperature on diversity or difference, and the BBC was trying to respond to that. Some might argue very slowly. It was slow, but they came up with the idea of a magazine format programme called Black Britain. Some people in the BBC reckoned I was a kind of headbanger, sensible kind of guy. They wanted to be their lead reporter, and so that was my transition on screen. So I'd been on radio as a reporter, and that was my transition on screen. We made some extraordinary films for that particular programme over a period of 3 years. As a consequence of that series, I was invited to become a correspondent for BBC News in the BBC newsroom. That again expanded my horizons, doing stories all around the world, as well as Black Britain, as well as doing special current affairs programmes for assignment and for correspondent, and doing pieces from our own correspondent. And so all the time my experience was expanding, and I was given lots of opportunity to expand that experience until 1999. Some of you may remember that was the time when things started to hot up on the terrorism front. There was a chap at Finsbury Park Mosque called Abu Hamza, a pretty unsavoury piece of work. It was quite obvious to me in 1998, 1999, and I wanted to do some more in-depth work on him, and the BBC and I found ourselves in a slightly tense standoff because I wanted to push the boat further than they wanted to at that point.